opportunity to submit their queries into the chat box. You may send your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the talk. We also request you to turn off your audio and video and maintain the same throughout the entire session. Now, without further ado, I invite Ms. Atulya from IEEE to deliver the welcome address.
Ladies and gentlemen, greetings to one and all. Myself, Atulya P from IEEE EMBS Kerala chapter is assigned with the task of welcoming all of you who have joined with us today for the talk. It gives me tremendous contentment to present the welcome speech amongst the most esteemed personalities. I extend a warm welcome to all at the 54th talk of Intersociety weekly webinar series. This great venture initiated by Intersociety has been successfully coordinated throughout the past 53 talks and is really good going with enormous speakers. Today's talk is not an exception. So today, I find immense pleasure in introducing our speaker, Dr. K.G. Satheesh Kumar, Director, Center for Assistive Technology and Innovation, National Institute of Speech and Hearing, Trivandrum. He will be sharing with us his insights on early intervention, habilitation, and education of persons with hearing impairment, Kerala experience. On behalf of all the attendees present here, with utmost honor and privilege, I welcome K.G. Satheesh Kumar, sir, to the 54th talk of Intersociety weekly webinar series. Welcome you, sir. I deem it as my privilege to welcome A.K. Unnikrishnan, sir, from Life Member Affinity Group, IEEE Kerala section, to the evening. Welcome you, sir, to the talks. To deliver the vote of thanks, we have with us Professor B.S. Manoj, sir, from IEEE EMBS. Welcoming you, sir, to the event. I am very delighted to welcome the Chair of Intersociety, Harindra Lal, sir, to the evening. Welcome you, sir. The event is organized by IEEE Kerala section, the Institution of Engineers Kerala State Center, Computer Society of India Trivandrum Chapter, Project Management Institute Kerala Chapter, Internet Society Trivandrum Chapter, Vakkom Moulavi Foundation Trust Trivandrum, Life Member Affinity Group IEEE Kerala section, IEEE Engineering in Medicine and Biology Kerala Chapter. So let me welcome all these organizations and the office bearers to the session. Let me also welcome our host, Ms. Gopika Raghunathan, and also Akhila Gauri Shankar ma'am from Project Management Institute Kerala Chapter, who will be controlling the today's event. Welcome Gopika and Akhila ma'am to the talk. Before we begin the seminar, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of you who sincerely committed to this event to make it a success. This event would have been impossible without the support of each and everyone present here. So let me welcome all the attendees who are awaiting for this session. Welcome you all to the 54th talk of Intersociety weekly webinar series. Webinars and talks are organized and conducted for the general audience to gain insight and information that would remain effective in their life exercises and work. On that note, let us begin the session. Once again, welcoming you all to the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Atulya, for your kind words of reception. As you all are aware, today's speaker is Dr. K.G. Satheesh Kumar, Director of National Institute of Speech and Hearing. Now, for the detailed speaker introduction and moderation, I request Dr. A.K. Unnikrishnan, IEEE LMED, to take over the virtual podium.
Thank you, Gopika. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Professor K.G. Satheesh Kumar, who holds PhD in Management, is currently Director of Center for Assistive Technology and Innovation at NISH, National Institute of Speech and Hearing, Thiruvananthapuram. He was earlier holding charge of the Executive Director of NISH. He has 38 years of experience spanning industry, infrastructure development, consulting, academic development, research and disability services. He was with Technopark during its formative years and was its CEO during 1997 to 2000. In 1998, he coordinated the creation of Kerala's first information technology class IT field. Later, as organizational development, DPR preparation, and strategic innovation for clients in India and abroad. Before joining NISH in 2015, Dr. Satheesh Kumar spent 10 years in academics and research in management. teaching at Indian Institute of Management, Indian Institute of Information Technology and Management, and Asian School of Business. Dr. Satheesh Kumar conducted management development programs for various organizations. Dr. Satheesh Kumar had served IEEE Kerala section and IEEE India Council in various capacities, including Chairman IEEE Kerala section and Secretary IEEE India Council. Thank you. Over to Gopika.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Satheesh Kumar to lead the platform. We are all here, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Unnikrishnan. Thank you all the organizers, Mr. Harindra Lal, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, it's my honor to be part of this Intersociety talk. In fact, I have been a regular participant and attendee at the Institute of Engineers, where the talks used to be conducted in the physical mode. Okay, now it has gone on the web for the last 1 year. And in fact, yeah, I have been participating in several of the talks, if not all. Okay, so my pleasure to talk to you about the field of rehabilitation and disability. I am not in this field for very long. I have spent only 5 years in this field. So I may not be a real authority in the field, but my talk today is based on what I have learned over the last 5 years. I think it's also important that I introduce NISH to all the participants here, because NISH is a very interesting organization, a service organization in the field of disability. As the name implies, we started with speech and hearing, but now we address all kinds of communication disabilities, including hearing, speech, neurodevelopmental disorders like autism, cerebral palsy, global developmental delays, learning disabilities, and so on. We focus mainly on development disabilities in children, but we also cater to the old age. We have a sizable population in the old age group. And sometimes we also get patients who have met with an accident or have suffered a stroke or need physiotherapy, occupational therapy, or psychological rehabilitation. So we are trying to be an all-round institution in the field of disability with focus on communication disabilities. We are not into disabilities related to movement yet, although it is part of our, okay, maybe we cater to it partly. Okay. Now, in today's talk, I will focus on one aspect of our work and experience managing speech and hearing disabilities, covering early intervention, habilitation or rehabilitation, and education. I will try to touch upon the successes, failures, insights, concerns, thoughts, and future directions. We at NISH, we cater to both integration and inclusion to an equal extent. So when I say integration, it means we try to bring the persons with disability into the mainstream. So, for instance, if a person is born deaf, usually that child may not talk. But if the child is given a hearing aid and given speech and language at a very early enough age, then the child can develop speech. That process is called mainstreaming, or we also call it integration. But beyond a certain age, the child will not speak, and then the child may have to resort to sign language. So that person will grow as a signing deaf. So the deaf may be speaking deaf or signing deaf or somewhere in between. So the speaking deaf can be integrated into the mainstream, but the signing deaf cannot be integrated. Okay, so there we have to adopt inclusion. So when we refer to inclusion, it means including the all the diverse population, okay, as they are. So if we include a signing deaf, it means we provide them with access using sign language. Similarly, when we say we include the deaf, the blind population, it means we accommodate their braille requirements. Okay, so that is about inclusion. So at NISH, we cater to both inclusion and integration. Integration is our first priority because that makes the person come into the mainstream, where inclusion is also necessary because for adult deaf people, we may have to resort to only inclusion. Okay. Early intervention, so which means catering to the disability at a very early age, usually a few weeks of birth. Early intervention is possibly the most efficient and also the most effective strategy to manage a disability. So whether it be deafness or vision problem or autism or any disability, it is better managed if we start early. So this is especially true for the hearing impairment because there's a critical age of 3 or 4 years after which speech language acquisition is almost impossible for a deaf child who has not been intervened earlier. The public and even many medical practitioners are unaware of this critical age of 3 to 4 years. Further, 85 to 90% of deaf kids are born to hearing parents who may refuse to accept the reality and often wait for the time and age to correct situation. So they may say that, okay, so he will be all right as he grows, or we will look at it when he goes to school, but that will be too late because beyond 4 years, speech cannot be acquired. In India, the average age at identification of a severe to profound sensory neural hearing loss is around 5 years. So it takes even up to 5 years to identify that there is a defect. And by this 5 years, precious time would have been lost beyond redemption. In Kerala, fortunately, thanks to neonatal hearing screening, the age identification has come down to an average of 9 months in recent years compared to 5 years all India. So in Kerala, it is less than 1 year. It is around 9 months, which is a very happy situation. We try to follow what is called the 136-1842 protocol, which aims at screening before the age of 1 month, confirmation before 3 months, hearing aid fitting before 6 months, cochlear implantation before 18 months, and mainstream integration before 42 months. So this is the protocol that we try to implement. Although these milestones are not achieved on the average, for example, instead of implantation at 18 months, the average implantation age is 38 months at present. Despite this, we are striving towards achieving the benchmark levels, and some cases we even do better. While early intervention and mainstream integration are high on our agenda for children with hearing impairment, we also are the pioneers in exclusive degree programs for the deaf in Indian Sign Language. We have the Indian Sign Language, or ISL, as the medium of education, and this paves the way for an inclusive approach to higher education. As mentioned earlier, beyond a certain age, a person cannot acquire spoken language as a mother tongue. For them, the sign language becomes the mother tongue. Education in sign language is very primitive in our country, and that is a major problem in our country. The Early Intervention Program, or as we call it, EIP, was the first program to start at NISH in 1997, 23 years ago. EIP aims to provide speech, language, literacy, that is reading and writing, to deaf and hard of hearing children in the 0 to 6 year age band. Of course, this is possible only with suitable hearing aid. This kind of systematic EIP is followed only in 2 institutions in the whole country, one in Trivandrum and one in Chennai. So otherwise, in the entire country, there is no single institution addressing this requirement. There is early intervention and giving speech and language to little deaf or hard of hearing children. We have been trying to spread this model to other locations in the country and in the state, but not very successful because there is heavy implicit knowledge contained in this model, and also it involves a lot of hard work, both on the part of the parents and the teachers. As we know, we understand the world based on the signals received from our senses. As little kids, as we grow up into adults, our brain learns. The entire processing is done in the brain in the cortices. Unlike most animals, humans are born unfinished. We need 1 year to learn to walk, 2 years to learn to talk, and many more years to fend for ourselves. While the human body is heavily dependent on others for survival, most animals are born much more independent. Dr. David Eagleman, in his book Brain, describes animal brains as pre-programmed or hardwired, while human brain is live-wired, giving humans some time to adapt to their environment. Live-wired meaning it can change, it can adapt. So this flexibility of the human brain is referred to as brain plasticity or neuroplasticity. But this plasticity is not forever. This is for a very short time from birth. Till about 2 to 3 years after birth, the brain forms a large number of connections or synapses. After this age, the unused connections are discarded and the used ones are strengthened to conserve energy. So the brain gets set around 5 years of age through this process. So the process of breaking the connections, removing the connections and strengthening the used ones depends on how much we use them. So repetitive use of synaptic connections is very critical during this period. And hence, so we acquire all our skills, including hearing, listening, seeing, touching, all our skills from practice. We all know that children are extremely active during this age. They are exploring, experimenting, and in that process, they are strengthening their synapses. According to certain research, a child hears a word around 44 million times before acquiring the ability to reproduce it or speak that word. Of course, the strengthening of synaptic connections is required for all the senses: hearing, vision, touch, smell, taste, balance, and proprioception. So so most of us have studied 5 senses, but in this field there are 7 senses. The 6th and 7th being balance and proprioception. Proprioception refers to the ability of the body to perceive its position in space. For example, so we are able to touch our nose even when the eyes are closed. That ability is called proprioception. Now, the plasticity has very important implications for our abilities. For instance, in the age when the brain remains plastic, the cortices will get reappropriated if they are not used. So, for a person who is deaf, who is not using the auditory cortex, that will be reappropriated by the vision. So, for a deaf person, vision will be more strong, and that happens at the cost of the auditory cortex. So, if the that's why it is very important to address or strengthen the auditory cortex at a very young age. If we fail to do that at a young age, then the auditory cortex is almost lost. We cannot get back much of it. So it goes to vision. So that's why beyond the age of 3 or 4, If a child does not develop the auditory cortex, he cannot speak again. He cannot hear or speak. So that means once a child has grown up, the use of hearing aid is meaningless, or the use of cochlear implant is meaningless when the child has grown up. The same applies for vision also. For instance, if a person who has been blind suddenly gets vision at maybe at the age of 10 or at an adult age, then the vision, the child will not be able to process what he sees. It becomes difficult. The brain, because the brain's vision cortex has not been deployed so far and not strengthened, and therefore it would have been reappropriated by other senses. So, for instance, we see deaf-blind people. Deaf-blind people, they are very strong in other senses, like for instance, touch. So, if a deaf-blind person touches you now, he will be able to recognize you even after several years by touch. So that's how the different cortices get reappropriated if they are not used and strengthened. During the initial years of the early intervention program at NISH, that is 20 years ago, the hearing aid technology had severe limitations, and cochlear implantation was not common then. The EIP team, the early intervention team at NISH, prioritize the acquisition of speech, language, literacy, and achieving academic performance as their goals. This was to be achieved through disciplined hard work by the parents of hearing impaired kids, through a strict schedule of tasks and goals enforced by a highly motivated, resolute, and committed team of special educators at NISH. This required a heavy commitment and effort on the part of the parents, because what happens at NISH is the teachers are usually training only the parents, and it is the parents' duty to train the children. That is because the teacher at NISH gets maybe 2 hours per day, but the child has to hear the 24 hours, and so it is up to the parent to fill up the gap, because the hearing, the ability to listen and understand starts much early in life, even before birth. At 5 months into pregnancy, the cochlea is usually well developed and the child can hear. So the child hears for 5 months before birth, nearly 2 years after birth, so a total of 2.5 years before starting to speak. Okay, so when the child is born deaf and has been identified as deaf maybe at the age of 6 months, nearly 1 year has been lost. So this loss has to be made up through therapy. So that's what we train the parents. So the parents will have to literally bombard the child with words. So the parents will have to speak to the child a lot. They will have to tell the child, so when they see a plant, okay, this is a plant, this is a rose, or this is a kitten, this is a dog. So they will have to continue talking to the child. And in fact, one of the issues that we face at NISH is that we repeatedly get complaints from say nuclear families. So the parents would be staying in apartments, maybe in a cosmopolitan city in Bangalore or Bombay or even abroad. The mother and the father will be busy, or they will be catering to their own work. So they will not get time to speak to the child. So in that process, what happens is the child misses these words and the child does not start speaking. So in around July, we get, that is when people come for vacations, midsummer vacations, we get a lot of cases of children not speaking even after 2 or 3 years. Why? This is because there is nobody to speak to the child. The child has not been bombarded with adequate words. So this is very important. So that's what we do in the early intervention. And this is a very strenuous thing for the teacher and the parents, and many families, many mothers, they come to Trivandrum, take a house near NISH for 4 years, and train their deaf child on speaking. This is what is happening now. Due to COVID, recently we have started doing these things online, but that is slightly less effective. Of course, we had to learn how to do it better. So sustaining such strenuous efforts over extended periods of time is a challenge to many parents. So sometimes they opt out in the initial years. Sometimes they break up from the family. There have been cases of divorce in the family due to this. Fortunately, the fruits of this hard work are become very visible soon, and parents get convinced that significant positive outcomes are achievable with consistent efforts. Accordingly, more recently, more and more parents are now willing to take the pains needed to wade through the tough regimen of early intervention program. The COVID-19 situation has now posed fresh challenges and also fresh opportunities, because now we are able to cater to the families far away from Trivandrum without them having to come to Trivandrum. Now again, a range of factors influence the outcome of the early intervention. They include the age at which they start intervention. As I said, if they start at the age of 3, then the results will be very poor. If they start at a few weeks of birth, the results will be excellent. The major difference is in the clarity of speech, because the child reproduces what he hears. Okay, so if there is no hearing aid, the child cannot speak. Even if there is a hearing aid, there may be frequency issues. Okay, the hearing aid may not have a good frequency response at all ranges. For instance, in many hearing aids, the high frequency response is poor. So that will affect, certain syllables like sa. So the child may hear sa as ta. So that affects the clarity of speech. So quite often, clarity of speech in deaf children is a hearing problem. It is a problem with the hearing aid. And so it's very difficult to identify that problem, because the child will not say, and most parents do not take the pains to notice that. Okay, so that's an important aspect. The objective of the early intervention program at NISH has been to integrate the hearing impaired child into the mainstream education at around 6 years of age, so that the child advances alongside typical hearing students, acquiring age-appropriate education. Usually, when the child leaves NISH, he or she will be much better equipped than the typical child, because they will be academically better. So in classes 1, 2, 3, and 4, usually they outperform the typical hearing child because they know better. But after the 4th standard, it becomes difficult because they will have to learn new things, and the class may not accommodate them sufficiently. About 10% of the integrated kids would perform quite well in the long run. And several of them pursue professional education in India and abroad. We have cases of students completing their engineering or medicine and going to internationally reputed universities like the Carnegie Mellon. So another 20% would stay integrated in the mainstream during their entire period of education, with average achievements thanks to the generosity of teachers who award marks liberally. So sometimes that's also a problem. Sometimes the teachers take a very liberal approach towards the deaf children, instead of presenting them with the challenge and opportunity to bring out their best. So that is the major problem that persons with disability face. Their teachers are extremely generous, and that's a major harm. So they are not challenged to bring out their best. And during the school period, around 50% of those who have been integrated, they drop out of speaking and they resort to sign language. Sometimes also due to stigma. So sometimes there is a peer pull. So for instance, if the child goes to a deaf school, there will be a peer pressure not to speak. they allow only sign language, and they drop out of the formal education. So overall, succeeding in a hearing-speaking world in the integrated mode is a challenge, which needs very high levels of motivation by the student and continuous support from the parents, teachers, and quite often significant financial resources. So that is usually not available to many. And also the charitable attitude of school teachers towards hearing impaired children and the lack of confidence in the abilities of deaf children is also a major issue. So what happens is these children, they get simply promoted from class to class without picking up any abilities, and they complete 12 years of school education, even unable to count up to 30 or 50. They will not have any arithmetic skills, and their language skills will be extremely poor. So that's what we see in many cases. Fortunately, over the years, over the last 20 years, we have seen that several technological developments like improvements in hearing aid, cochlear implant technology, our own experience in intervention, early enrollment, increased confidence among parents, maturing of the processes, neonatal hearing screening. Due to all these reasons, the outcomes from early intervention has been improving over the years. So we are now much better positioned than we were 20 years ago. Lack of speech clarity continues to be an issue, which has been addressed through cochlear implantation. So that's why we emphasize that the child should be given cochlear implantation at a very early age. So now implantation can be done at around 1 year of age. So they start with better speech. So after cochlear implantation, they need to go through 2 years of therapy. It is called auditory verbal therapy. And NISH has been doing it quite well. And the results have also been measured and have been very encouraging. Since 2000, the cochlear implantation therapy is quite expensive. It costs a family around 10 lakhs, including the implant and the surgery and so on. So, but since 2001, the government of Kerala is running a program called Sruthi Tharangam. So under this program, cochlear implantation is done free of cost for children under the poverty line. And this has been continuing even today. So far, over 1,000 children have been provided cochlear implantation, all costs met by the government of Kerala, including warranty support, the cost of 2 years of therapy, and also the cost of care, maintenance, the cost of consumables. Last year onwards, in 2019-20 onwards, the government of Kerala has started providing bilateral implantation on an experimental basis. Bilateral means cochlear implant in both ears. So earlier we were giving only in 1 year. So cochlear implant in 1 year and hearing aid in the other ear. So that is the very common thing. But if the child can have cochlear implantation in both ears, then the performance will be extremely better, and the child will almost will grow as good as a typical child. So the longitudinal outcome measure study, which we have been doing over the last 5 years, has indicated a success rate of cochlear implantation program and therapy to be quite high. In fact, we are much better than the All India figures in this. Because the All India level, the expectations are also very different. For example, a typical North Indian parent may be happy if the deaf child responds to his when he's called, or if he's able to call say mama, papa, they'll be happy. But the typical Kerala parents are not happy with that. They want the child to perform academically well. So that's why the parents pull is also there for the better performance of our auditory verbal therapy systems. So at NISH, we perform AVT in two streams. One is performed by special educators, the other is performed by audiologists. These two people have different approaches. The special educators focus on academics, whereas the audiologists do not have that focus. They give only the auditory capability and then leaves it to the child to develop the rest. So there are pluses and minuses with both these approaches. Now, the integration, as I said, our objective is integration, and integration has been having its own challenges. As I said earlier, integration has not been 100% effective. Maybe it may be effective for 20% of the people, or maybe 30%. The rest of the children, some group will continue to perform okay. Some others fall out. Okay, so that means there has to be an alternative. So that alternative is sign language. So if the child does not do well in with spoken language, the child nevertheless has to have a language, because without language we cannot learn, we cannot live. So language is the most distinguishing feature of the human race. So the child has to have a language. So the alternative to spoken language is the sign language. In fact, till about 10-15 years ago, NISH also did not actively promote the sign language, because there has been a lot of resistance. Still, it is there from the parents of deaf children against sign language. But that is now changing, because sign language is also universally adopted as a very important language. It can be used not only for communication, but also for learning. The Indian Sign Language is adopted on an all-India basis. It's not very old. It is just less than a decade old. Its vocabulary is still under development. We have been contributing to the vocabulary significantly because the vocabulary development in certain areas, let's say, for instance, engineering or in medicine or in law, that takes time. So we have contributed to the vocabulary in the area of computer science. And once these children are given the language and developed with the sign language, they pick up the concepts quite well. In fact, the Act of 2016 called the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, it mandates that the child should be provided the sign language or accommodation. So it is up to the state governments and the organizations to cater to these needs. At NISH we have degree programs in sign language. We cater to the deaf. We have degree programs in fine arts, computer science, and Vakkom. So these kids have been getting good placements. We give them training and internships. But even with all this, we have a problem. Still now there is a gap, because the gap is like this. From LKG to class 12, there is no school in the entire country which can give Indian Sign Language and reading and writing skills in English or another language. Okay, because that is very important, because the Indian Sign Language has no script. So that means you cannot have books. You can have only videos, and it is not a very effective process. So it is very important that the child who does not get integrated and develops the sign language is also equipped with reading and writing skills in English or Malayalam or any other language. And that is quite possible. That's quite possible. But we are not addressing that. Okay, so NISH has put up a proposal, and now we are trying to address that segment also. Although it is a bit difficult for us because it does not usually fall under our area of activity, because we are not interested in running a school. So, but if somebody is willing to take up that activity, uh, because it's very difficult to promote such a school in the private sector, because the problem is the clientele doesn't have the ability to pay. They are typically poor people. So unfortunately, most of the disabilities affect more of the economically weaker sections. So this has to be addressed by the government. So NISH has tried to create a unique coexistence of the dichotomous worlds of speech and sign for the deaf. In an attempt to provide opportunities for the deaf, we pursue both. This is not found elsewhere in India or even abroad. In many parts of the world, they focus either on speech or sign language, but we are focusing on both. We encourage both. And at this point of time, we are trying to promote a school also in sign language. So let me leave at this stage. And so I have talked about one aspect of NISH, which is about speech and hearing, where we cater to the spoken deaf and the signing deaf. Speaking deaf and the signing deaf. We also have other areas of, we also address, provide rehabilitation services to other areas of developmental disabilities, like as I mentioned earlier, autism, cerebral palsy, learning disabilities. We also cater to the elderly. Okay, why I'm not marketing NISH. The reason I'm saying this here is that many people are not aware of the need to address disabilities at a very early age. Okay, so there's many people wait till the child is 3 years. Okay, so that should not happen. Even for even the child has autistic behavior, earlier the better. Okay, so let me with this conclude my talk and wait for responses and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your thoughts and for sharing your thoughts and experiences. It was such an engaging talk. Now the floor is open for discussion. We have some queries popped up in the chat box. So the first question is from Ravindranath, sir. So the question is, he's inquiring about the availability of doctors specialized in speech and hearing at NISH to investigate and assess children's disability of speech and hearing.
Okay, so as I said, we are into rehabilitation. This is not a medical field. This is a field allied to the medical field. So we don't have any. So we have an ENT doctor. That's the only doctor that we have. So, but otherwise we have therapists and audiologists. Of course, many of them have PhDs in their fields. Any doctor specialized in speech and hearing needs to investigate and assess children's disabilities in speech and hearing. Yeah, exactly. That's what we have. So, we have research departments also. We do continuously research on the areas, and we can definitely investigate and assess children's ability to speak and hear. We can do that. We actually do that right from birth.
Okay, sir. So we have another query from Professor N. Patnabhayar. So the question is about, are you giving any consultation in NISH from little child to very elderly? Is it free or paid? And he's also inquiring about the voluntary organizations which are helping such patients at NISH. Because he himself was working the voluntary activities when he was in his college days.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, sir. Yes, we can do that. We actively encourage the voluntary activities. Okay, we are willing to associate with other organizations are also who are volunteering to this area. And yeah, we can do that. If there is any specific requirement, we can definitely do that. There are many students who do internship with us, many students who volunteer with us. People also who have been working or taken an off from work and volunteering with us. But some of these have been affected by COVID recently. But otherwise, volunteering is, yeah, we accept volunteers.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, there are a lot of positive feedbacks regarding your talk. So another question from Surendran sir regarding the availability of training to school teachers about training of such patient or such children.
Yeah, definitely we give training because we have found that is a requirement. Because as I said, we mainstream the deaf child, and when they go to LKG or Standard 1, they are quite capable. They can hear, speak, they can understand many things. They're academically even at a level higher than the typical hearing child. Okay, but the problem is the teachers do not accept that. The teacher in the school usually takes a very charitable, generous approach towards the child with disability. In that process, the teacher prevents the child's learning. The teacher is extremely generous, and that is the problem that we face. So we try to educate the teachers. We regularly sensitize them. Okay, please do challenge them. Do not make things unnecessarily easy for them. Do not write examinations for them. Okay, do not write on the board. Okay, in some deaf schools, what happens is the answers are written on the board in the class, so the children can just copy. This is a great cruelty to the child. It preempts the child's willingness to study. So we give such sensitization trainings regularly. We also train teachers on Indian Sign Language. Okay, so we have been doing that on an informal basis. We have been doing that on a regular systematic basis in association with the education department, but with varying successes, because what happens is the teachers are not always willing to change ways. For various reasons, it is not entirely their fault. Till very recently, the deaf school teachers were transferable. They were transferable to other schools. So, which means, so by the time the teacher is trained and gets accustomed to the way of training a deaf child, he or she gets transferred. So the new person has to start all over again. So we have represented to the government, and now the government has stopped this, at least at the higher secondary level. So, but still in the up to class 10 level, the teachers are transferable.
Thank you, sir. Another question is from Adila ma'am. So that is about, she knows a person who hears a different or spells a different syllable for another sound, say tha for ka and sa for tha. So she's asking your opinion for the cause of such an issue.
Okay, so the adults should speak to the children in very clear language. Okay, so otherwise they will, because they reproduce what they learn. And as I said, the first 3-4 years of the child's life, the brain is plastic and it gets frozen after 4 years. Okay, so after that we cannot change things. It is extremely difficult to change, because for instance, the person who hears sa and says tha may later, after the cochlear rehabilitation or say improving the frequency response of the hearing aid, may hear properly, but at that point of time he may not be able to correct the speech. Okay. Or the child will have to put conscious efforts. Okay. Once it gets wired into the brain, you don't have to put in conscious efforts. It becomes an involuntary action. Okay. But once the brain is frozen, you have to consciously put in the effort not to say ta. So naturally the child will say ta, but then he will remember, oh, it should be sa. So that is the difference. So the parents should be aware of this. Most people are not aware about this brain plasticity thing. They believe that the learning can happen at any stage. Because even today, in fact, many people believe that a child can start listening properly by fitting a cochlear implant at any stage. That's not, doesn't happen. Or a child who gets vision at the age of 10 years can properly see. That's not true, because our senses perform with the help of the brain. The processing happens in the brain. So the brain should be skilled, and there should be adequate number of cells in the brain cortices trained for this. So once the cells get reappropriated to other areas, this is not possible. So the brain plasticity is a very important aspect in this regard, and many people are not aware of that.
Thank you, sir. Another question from Induleka ma'am regarding the information on sign languages which are having scripts.
No, I said sign language does not have script. So sign language, initially, most people can have a gestural language. For instance, they can say, have gestures for drinking or eating or sleeping. These are universally understood, but they can be used only for communications. But to learn abstract concepts or to be used for education, the sign language should have a depth of vocabulary. Okay, especially if you want to teach computer science in Indian Sign Language, it needs definitely a sizable vocabulary. So that vocabulary building takes time, and therefore we are now promoting only one sign language for the whole of India. It is called Indian Sign Language. The Indian Sign Language at this point of time has a vocabulary of 10,000 words, which is much fewer compared to the American Sign Language, which has been around for 70-75 years. Okay, so it takes time to develop the vocabulary, and that serves the purpose of communication and also understanding, because the major challenge of the deaf people is understanding the concepts. Okay, so they will be able to understand the concepts. But then to record the concepts, to preserve them, they will have to be videographed, or they have to learn reading and writing. So that's why we emphasize the ability to read and write. So we say deaf, signing deaf should learn reading and writing in natural language. Okay, of course they cannot speak because the brain plasticity is not there, and so they cannot acquire speech now. That is fine. Let them sign, but they can definitely pick up reading and writing. That's not an issue.
Thank you, sir. So another question from Mr. R.P. Nair. Is there any statistics on the number of deaf and dumb children streetwise?
Okay, it is around 1%. So the population is around 1%. So, by the way, the terminology, we do not use deaf and dumb, D-U-M-B, anymore, because dumb also may mean mentally retarded. Okay, maybe in the olden days, deaf people, because they did not communicate, may have appeared to be dumb. So that may be the reason why the usage deaf and dumb developed. But over a period of time, more recently we use deaf and mute. Deaf and mute. But now they also have objected to that usage. They use only deaf. Okay, so we now use the word only deaf. Now, some people are okay with the word deaf. Some people prefer hearing impaired. But the people who are signing deaf, they do not like the word hearing impaired because they say that they are not impaired. They don't have any disability. Okay, because we are deaf. Our communication is through sign. Our mother tongue is sign language, so we don't have any disability. So that's the stand that they take. Therefore, the terminology confusion continues to exist. Some people don't like the use of hearing impaired. Some people don't like deaf. Okay, dumb nobody likes. Okay, so please don't use the phrase deaf and dumb. Okay, as I said, the statistics is around 1%.
Thank you, sir. So another question from Dr. N. Panikar. Are people with handicaps more selfish than others? Is an extra training emphasis needed for social service?
Okay, so that's a sensitive question. Definitely, people with impairments, people with disabilities have limitations because they haven't had the opportunity to pick up exposure. So people get sophisticated, people get more accommodative, their hearts become wider with exposure, with understanding. But unfortunately, for most persons with disabilities, the exposure is limited. So therefore, they haven't had the opportunity to develop their hearts so much. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is they have learned that they can get things only by fighting. Okay, and therefore their associations are very stringent. They are always in the fighting mode. For example, the Indian Sign Language, they do not allow hearing people to teach Indian Sign Language. Okay, they insist that only the deaf should teach Indian Sign Language because they say that is an opportunity for the deaf. Otherwise, that opportunity is they are losing that opportunity. But the flip side is that in that process, the propagation of Indian Sign Language gets curtailed. So we want the language to be popular as possible. Okay. So therefore, I would like to rephrase your statement. We cannot call them selfish. Maybe they are not as exposed as the typically developing people.
Thank you, sir. Now, another question from Akila ma'am. For CSE program, how do you incorporate the new and ever improving technological terms?
Okay, that is a very important question because technological terms, when every new term comes, they have to develop a sign. Okay, that's a very important activity. Okay, this happens not only in the field of computer science, in every field, when a new term has to be introduced, we invite a few deaf people and then explain the concept to them. And with that understanding of the concept, they develop a sign. Okay, and once the sign is developed, a video of the sign is created, and we send it to an institution in Delhi called the Indian Sign Language Research and Training Center. So the repository for all the signs is located at a central location in India, and then they popularize that new term. Okay, so this is how we develop a new term in whichever field.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any
another question from? Yeah, sorry, sir.
So
yes,
is there any effort to develop software to translate voice to text to sign language and vice versa? Okay, such software is already available. Okay, but there are issues. Okay, the first one issue is that in the Indian context, sometimes the translation from voice to text is not very perfect. Number two, quite often when we speak, we may mix languages. We may mix English and Malayalam. So then also it becomes difficult. But the most important reason is that most deaf hate to read. So we may think, in fact, when I joined NISH 5 years ago, now 6 years ago, my thinking was also like this. If they cannot hear, why can't they read? But the point is they cannot read. They can't read. Simply they can't read. Okay. They have not been trained to read. They hate reading. They're not able to read. So that's why we need to emphasize in the school education where alongside their sign language, they need to be trained to read and write in at least one language, if possible, English and Malayalam. Is Indian Sign Language science, including those for computer science, available on the internet? Yeah, I think there are some sites where you can do that. But I think ISLRTC repository will have all these sites.
Okay, sir. I think that was the last question. Thank you for sharing your time and thoughts. So before we wind up, a few words of gratitude. I invite Dr. B.S. Manoj to deliver the vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Gopika. Thanks for this opportunity to deliver vote of thanks for this 54th Intersociety weekly webinar, which is just now concluded with the lecture by Professor K.G. Satheesh Kumar, who is a friend of mine and an IEEE colleague. So, in fact, I just want to mention that we have completed 1 year for this Intersociety weekly webinar series. Sir, Professor K.G. Satheesh Kumar, you have given a very interesting talk today. We are very, very glad that we have attended this. You have given a very brief introduction to NISH. You have mentioned that you serve the 1% of the children and population who are, having some sort of a difference from the rest of the 99% of the population. You also mentioned the importance of the protocol 13618 and clearly communicated the need for early intervention. So particularly, the importance of starting the treatment or starting the therapy as early as few weeks, where you get the results, success rate very, very excellent. And if you start, more than 3 years old, the success rate can be very, very poor. So that communicated very well to all the audience that why early intervention is very, very critical. So you also mentioned and highlighted the role of parents to speed up the therapy in case if the intervention is actually late for underprivileged children. Particularly those in the nuclear families where there can be delay in further impact of the therapy. So the development of Indian Sign Language, which is only 10 years old, where you have contributed along with your institute's colleagues in developing that, in giving vocabulary extension in areas such as emerging areas like computer science. So you also have mentioned the importance of frequency response, flat frequency response for the hearing aids, without which you might hear sounds like sa as a different sound like tha, which if we understood very well, we can actually help by speaking that as clearly and as correctly as possible to the children who are affected. The role of teachers you have mentioned, both the positive as well as the negative roles, which are very important. I was not aware of the negative roles that teachers may contribute to this, unknowingly in the name of helping them. So you also have initiated a lot of activities to reach out to underprivileged and below poverty line children with schemes free cochlear implantation and with the support of the government. And also by-year cochlear implantation with a very, very high success rate. I'm really glad to see that, really surprised to know that the expectation of parents across India vary, across cultures vary, and that also, plays a role in the therapist community, to, educate the parents to expect a better, so that the children affected can be treated well. So I'm really glad that I got this opportunity to extend our heartfelt gratitude from the Intersociety Weekly Webinar Committee, IEEE EMBS, Project Management Institute, and all other societies which are part of this particular organization. So thank you, sir. Thank you for your excellent communication. It was indeed required, even though NISH is like a couple of kilometers from my home. I was actually not aware of the importance of it, as well as the role that you have played as director of NISH in aiding this differently abled or hearing impaired or deaf community, which really need a timely intervention to help them. Thank you, sir. Dr. Harindralal, who helped organize this, is an organizer, but I still feel like we should thank him. Thank you, Dr. Harindralal, sir. Then I would like to thank Dr. A.K. Unnikrishnan from PMI Institute, who have helped us in organizing this. I also would like to thank a lot of dignitaries who attended this, Padmanabha Iyer sir, Dr. N. Panikar, Dr. Gopakumar, Dr. Murali Mohanlal, Dr. Ravindranath sir, Suhair sir, Ashok Kumar sir, and many, many more dignitaries are here. I'm unable to call everybody. And our own organizers, Gopika Raghunathan, Nadulya, Nikita, and Akhila Gauri, and all other IEEE volunteers, IEEE student members, other members of the associated societies, and all other audience, we extend our thankfulness to you for participating in this. So you might be seeing on the screen our 55th lecture on multiple intelligences that will be scheduled next Wednesday, same time, by Dr. Venugopal Esrinder. Thank you all for coming here, and we request you to be part of this weekly webinar series in the following events too. Thank you. Over to you, Gopika.
Thank you, Dr.
Sir. Yeah, thank you, sir, for your kind words. Now, as we near the end of a lively gathering, I invite your attention to the details of the next talk of Intersociety Weekly Webinar Series, which is scheduled on the evening of 28th April. Details are being displayed on screen. The talk will be on multiple intelligences by Dr. Venugopal Esrinder. Also, I request the participants to fill out the feedback form. The link is given in your mail. Your valuable inputs are necessary for our improvement. You can also watch the complete recording of today's webinar in the YouTube channel of IEWS. So on behalf of the organizing committee, I thank you all once again for joining us today. Signing out from this event, and goodbye till we meet next. Stay safe and thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was great.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, team.